When an unseen terror stalks the Texas frontier, preying on Ranger and Comanche alike, sworn enemies must forge a desperate truce. Can they silence their hatred long enough to hunt the nightmare that bleeds the land dry? Before it consumes them all, what monstrous secret lurks in the moonlit shadows? The sun beat down on Captain Eli Stone's worn hat, baking the dust on his shoulders into a fine crust. He squinted, his pale eyes scanning the endless roll of the Texas prairie. It was too quiet. That was the first thing that pricked at the back of his neck. Not the good kind of quiet, the kind that let a man think, but the heavy, waiting kind, like the air before a summer storm. His rangers, a dozen hard-bitten men, rode loosely behind him, their faces grim. Another patrol, another day spent wondering if today was the day a Comanche arrow found its mark. Eli was tired. Tired of the heat, tired of the dust, tired of the endless bloody dance with the Comanche. They fought for this land, both sides, with a fury that left little room for anything but more fighting. He'd seen too many good men die, on both sides if he was honest with himself in the dead of night, though he'd never say it aloud. He just wanted a day, just one, where he didn't have to look over his shoulder. "Anything, Captain?" young Miller asked, his voice still cracking sometimes despite the fuzz on his chin. Eli shook his head. "Just the buzzards, Miller, and they're always hungry." He nudged his horse, Bess, forward. They were heading for Oakhaven Creek, a small outpost, little more than a fortified cabin, manned by 5 rangers. It was supposed to be a routine check-in. The smell hit them before they saw it. A coppery, rank odor, thick enough to taste. Eli's hand went to the Colt at his hip. The other rangers tensed, rifles coming up. Bess snorted, her ears swiveling nervously. As they topped the last rise overlooking Oakhaven Creek, Eli pulled Bess to a sharp halt. Miller gasped behind him. The cabin was still there, but it looked wrong. The heavy wooden door was ripped from its hinges, splintered like kindling. One wall had a gaping hole in it, as if something immense had punched its way through. No smoke rose from the chimney. No sentry challenged them. "Stay here," Eli ordered, his voice low and gravelly. "Cover me." He dismounted, his boots sinking into the soft earth. The silence now screamed. He drew his Colt, the click of the hammer loud in the stillness, and walked slowly towards the ruined outpost. The closer he got, the worse the smell became. Flies buzzed, a thick, angry cloud. He stepped over the threshold, into the dim interior. The small room was a wreck. Furniture was smashed, supplies scattered, and the bodies, he'd seen death in many forms. Arrow wounds, gunshot wounds, the clean slice of a knife. This was different. Corporal Davies lay near the overturned table, his chest. Eli swallowed hard. It wasn't cut. It was torn, ripped open with a savagery that made his stomach churn. 3 more bodies were in similar states, their limbs twisted at unnatural angles, their faces frozen in masks of pure terror. There was so much blood. It soaked the dirt floor, splattered the walls. He searched for the 5th man, Private Hanson, but he was nowhere inside. Eli backed out, his heart pounding a heavy rhythm against his ribs. This wasn't Comanche work. He knew their methods. They were brutal, yes, but there was a purpose to their violence. This was frenzy, animalistic. But what kind of animal could do this to 5 armed men, rip through a solid wood door, tear apart a cabin wall? His men had gathered, their faces pale. "Captain?" One of them, a veteran named Jeb, asked, his voice hushed. "Comanches didn't do this," Eli said, his voice flat. I don't know what did." He walked around the cabin, his eyes scanning the ground. He found tracks, huge ones like a wolf's, but far, far too big. And the claw marks on the wood, they were deep, powerful. And near the edge of the clearing, leading into the dense thicket of trees that lined the creek, he found what was left of Private Hanson. Or part of him. Drag marks led further into the shadows. A cold dread, colder than any winter wind, settled over Eli. He'd fought men his whole life. He knew how to fight men. This was something else, something unknown, something that turned seasoned rangers into heaps of shredded meat and instilled a primal fear he hadn't felt since he was a boy, afraid of the dark. "Pack up what supplies are left," he ordered, his voice tight. "We ride back to Fort Worth, now." He didn't want to spend another minute near this place, especially with nightfall only a few hours away. The whispers had already started among the men, hushed words of demons, of creatures from old forgotten tales. Eli tried to ignore them, tried to think logically, but the image of Davis's torn body, the sheer violence of it, kept flashing in his mind. As they rode away, the sun dipping low and painting the sky in hues of blood orange and deep purple, Eli couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them from the deepening shadows of the trees. The prairie was no longer just a place of human conflict. Something ancient and terrible had awakened, and its hunger was just beginning. The silence that followed them was no longer just quiet. It was the silence of something holding its breath, waiting. The fight he was tired of might just have become a whole lot worse. Miles away, as the same sun bled across the western sky, Iron Hawk, war leader of his Comanche band, crouched low. His black eyes, sharp as a hawk's indeed, scanned the narrow, rock-strewn canyon. His three best hunters, Laughing Bear, Swift Otter, and Young Elk, had been gone since morning, tracking a small herd of deer. They should have returned by now. An unease, like ants crawling under his skin, had been with him since midday. Iron Hawk was a man forged in the crucible of the plains. He'd faced the white soldiers, the Tejanos, many times. He knew their ways, their treachery, their stubbornness. He respected their tenacity, even as he fought to drive them from the land that had belonged to the Numunu, the people, for generations beyond counting. But this unease was different. It didn't taste of gunpowder or the Rangers' grim determination. It tasted older, wilder. He rose, a silent shadow, and signaled to two warriors waiting patiently behind him. "They are late," he said, his voice a low rumble. "We look." They moved with the fluid grace of creatures born to the wilderness, their moccasined feet making no sound on the rocky ground. The canyon walls rose steeply on either side, casting long, distorted shadows as the light faded. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, and something else. Something acrid and faintly sweet, like stale blood. Iron Hawk's nostrils flared. He held up a hand, and his warriors froze. He listened, every sense straining. The usual night sounds were beginning, the chirp of crickets, the distant hoot of an owl. But beneath them, or rather absent from them, was the normal rustle of small animals. The canyon felt empty, held in suspense. They found Swift Otter first, near a shallow stream, or what was left of him. Iron Hawk's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching beside his eye. Swift Otter, one of their fastest runners, a joyful spirit, was— he had no other word for it. Mutilated, not by bullets, not by the clean cuts of ranger knives. His bow lay snapped beside him, his quiver of arrows scattered and broken, as if in a frantic, useless defence. The ground was torn up, as if by a terrible struggle. A low growl escaped one of the warriors. Iron Hawk silenced him with a sharp glance. Panic was a disease. They found Laughing Bear a little further on, closer to the canyon wall. His powerful arms, usually so full of life and humour, contorted. The same horrific wounds. Young Elk was missing. But they found his spear, its tip shattered, embedded in the hard earth near a series of massive deep tracks. Tracks unlike any Iron Hawk had ever seen. They were like those of a great wolf, but larger, the claws longer, sharper, digging deep into the soil with terrifying force. One of the warriors, whose name was Stone Hoof, whispered, "What beast does this, Iron Hawk? Not bear, not mountain lion." Iron Hawk didn't answer immediately. He knelt, studying the tracks. His grandfather, a wise old man, had told stories, fireside tales meant to scare children and caution warriors. Stories of shapeshifters, of men who became beasts, of creatures that hunted under the dark of the moon, their hunger insatiable, their strength unnatural. He had always dismissed them as just stories, until now. He looked up at the sky. The moon was a few nights shy of full, a pale sliver hanging in the darkening velvet. "But something walks this land that is not of our world, nor of the white man's," he said finally, his voice heavy. "Something old." They searched for young Elk until the darkness became too thick, until the shadows themselves seemed to crawl with unseen things. They found more signs of his desperate flight, a torn piece of his buckskin shirt, more of those monstrous tracks, but not young Elk. Returning to their main camp was one of the hardest things Iron Hawk had ever done. The wails of the women when they heard the news, the fear in the eyes of the children, the grim disbelief on the faces of the other warriors, it all weighed on him. He was their war leader. He was supposed to protect them. That night, few slept. The fires were built higher than usual, casting flickering, nervous light on the painted teepees. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the brush beyond the firelight made people jump. The old stories were retold, no longer as entertainment, but as desperate attempts to understand, to find some defense against a terror they couldn't name. Iron Hawk listened, his face a mask of stone, but inside a cold rage mixed with a primal fear. His people were being hunted, not by soldiers, he understood, but by a nightmare given flesh. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this was only the beginning. The monster was still out there, in the deep darkness of the canyons, and it would kill again. The echoes of its passage were not just in the canyon, but in the terrified hearts of his people. The days that followed were wrapped in a shroud of fear for both the Rangers at Fort Worth and Iron Hawk's Comanche band. Reports trickled in, each more disturbing than the last. A lone trapper found near the Brazos River, his body savaged, a small homestead, its family vanished, only bloodstains and those same monstrous tracks left behind. Then a Comanche hunting party, smaller than iron hawks, failed to return from the northern plains. Their remains were found scattered, bearing the unmistakable signs of the beast's horrific work. Eli Stone felt the fort grow tighter, the men jumpier. He'd sent riders to other outposts warning them, but what could he warn them against? A ghost? A demon wolf? The official reports were carefully worded. Unknown animal attack, but the whispers were louder, more specific. Werewolf. The word itself felt like a curse. He'd tried to quash the talk, but the evidence was too stark, too terrifyingly consistent. His own nightmares were filled with snapping jaws and glowing eyes. For Iron Hawk, the attacks were a direct assault on his people's spirit. The Numunu were masters of the wilderness, yet this creature moved through their lands like an invisible plague, striking with impunity. His warriors were brave, but how did one fight a shadow that ripped men apart? He saw the fear in their eyes, the way mothers clutched their children closer. He had to do something. But what? Their arrows seemed useless against it, their spears unable to find purchase. The breaking point came when a ranger patrol and a Comanche scouting party, unbeknownst to each other, stumbled upon the same gruesome scene. A small neutral trading post, frequented by both sides in times of uneasy peace, utterly destroyed. White traders, Comanche families, even their horses and dogs, all slaughtered with the same nightmarish brutality. The sheer scale of it was horrifying, and in the churned mud, the tracks of the beast were everywhere, alongside the smaller, fainter tracks of its terrified victims. The two groups nearly came to blows, each initially suspecting the other of orchestrating the massacre to frame them. But the evidence of the true killer was too overwhelming. The lead ranger, a pragmatic sergeant named Cutter, and the Comanche brave leading his group, a stoic warrior called Two Feathers, found themselves staring at each other over the carnage, a dawning, shared horror in their eyes. Word reached Eli and Iron Hawk almost simultaneously. A rider, pale and shaken, brought the news to Fort Worth. A runner, breathless and wide-eyed, reached Iron Hawk's camp. Both leaders knew, with a grim certainty, that this could not continue. The beast was not distinguishing between Ranger and Comanche. It was simply killing. The meeting place was chosen carefully, a neutral stretch of open prairie by a shallow, nameless creek, midway between the fort and the Comanche's current hunting grounds. Neither side trusted the other. Eli brought 20 rangers, heavily armed. Iron Hawk came with 20 warriors, their bows strung, their faces painted for war, yet also for mourning. The tension was a living thing, thick and suffocating. As the two groups faced each other across 100 yards of sun-baked grass, old hatred simmered just beneath the surface. Eli dismounted, holding his hands out, palms open, a gesture he hoped conveyed a desire for parley, not surrender. Iron Hawk mirrored the gesture, his expression unreadable. They met in the middle, alone, their men watching their every move, fingers tight on triggers and bowstrings. "Iron Hawk," Eli said, his voice raspy from dust and disuse. "It's Stone," the Comanche leader replied, his voice a low growl. The air crackled. For a long moment they just stared, two men who had spent years as bitter enemies, now forced together by a threat neither understood. "Your warriors are being killed," Eli stated, not an accusation, but a fact. "Your soldiers too," Iron Hawk countered. "This thing, it does not care for our wars." No, Eli agreed, shaking his head slowly. It only cares for blood. He paused, the words feeling heavy and strange on his tongue. We found the trading post. Ironhawk nodded grimly. My scouts also. It is a demon. Maybe, Eli said, or maybe just an animal we haven't seen before. A very big, very savage animal. He didn't believe that, not entirely. The intelligence in the creature's attacks, the way it seemed to anticipate them, felt like more than just animal cunning. But he wasn't ready to speak of werewolves to the Comanche war chief, not yet. It bleeds our people dry, Ironhawk said, his gaze sweeping over Eli's face, searching. The Numunu will not be hunted like deer. Neither will the Rangers, Eli said. We can keep fighting each other, Ironhawk, and while we do, this beast will pick us off one by one. Our dead will litter this land, and it will grow fat. A hawk circled lazily overhead, a silent observer to their unnatural counsel. The wind whispered through the prairie grass, carrying the scent of distant rain and the faint lingering smell of fear that seemed to permeate everything now. Ironhawk was silent for a long time, his dark eyes fixed on Eli. The ranger could almost feel the weight of generations of conflict, of broken treaties and spilled blood pressing down on them. To trust a white man, a ranger, was anathema, and yet, "What do you propose, Stone?" Ironhawk finally asked, his voice still hard, but with a new, almost imperceptible note of wary pragmatism. Eli took a breath. This was it. A truce, he said, the word feeling alien. Not peace, not friendship, a truce, long enough to hunt this thing down, together. Your trackers, your knowledge of this land, my men's rifles. We combine our strengths, we find it, we kill it. The silence stretched again, taut as a bowstring. Eli could hear the nervous shuffle of horses behind him, the faint click of a rifle bolt as one of his men shifted position. He kept his eyes locked on Ironhawk. Finally, the Comanche leader gave a curt nod. "For the beast only," he said, his voice low and fierce. "When it is dead, the truce is dead." "Agreed," Eli said, relief washing over him, so potent it almost made him sway. "When it is dead, the truce is dead." He didn't offer his hand. He knew it wouldn't be accepted, but as he looked at the grim, determined face of the Comanche war leader, he saw not an enemy, but a fellow survivor, facing a horror that transcended their old hatreds. The cost of this alliance was the suspension of a war. The price of failure was annihilation for them all. The path ahead was dark and dangerous, but for the first time in days, Eli felt a sliver, just a tiny sliver, of something that wasn't pure, unadulterated fear. It might have been hope, or perhaps just the grim resolve of a fight he finally understood how to begin. The first days of the combined hunt were a masterclass in strained tolerance. Rangers, accustomed to their own tight discipline and familiar comrades, found themselves riding stirrup to stirrup with Comanche warriors, whose language they didn't understand and whose customs were alien. The Comanches equally viewed the loud, often clumsy white soldiers with deep suspicion, their every move scrutinized for trickery. Eli Stone and Ironhawk became reluctant translators and enforcers of their fragile pact, constantly stepping in to smooth ruffled feathers or glare down brewing confrontations. "They make too much noise," Ironhawk grumbled to Eli one morning, gesturing with his chin towards a group of rangers who were checking their rifles with metallic clicks. The beast will hear us from miles away." "They need to know their weapons are ready," Eli countered, though he understood the Comanche's point. "Your men are quiet, I'll give you that. But can an arrow stop something that tears through cabin walls?" The unspoken challenge hung between them. Their methods were different, their strengths diverse, and the success of this desperate venture depended on finding a way to make those differences work together instead of against each other. The Comanches took the lead in tracking. Two of Iron Hawk's best scouts, Silent Fox and Running Wolf, fanned out ahead, their eyes missing nothing. A bent blade of grass, a disturbed pebble, the faintest scuff mark in the hard-packed earth. They moved with an almost supernatural quietness, blending into the landscape until they were nearly invisible. The Rangers followed, often feeling like bulls in a china shop, their horses' hooves and clanking gear seeming to echo in the vast stillness. They picked up the trail near the ruined trading post, those same monstrous clawed footprints leading away from the carnage and into the dense, tangled woodlands that bordered the Lampasas River. The forest was a suffocating place, sunlight struggling to penetrate the thick canopy. Shadows danced and writhed, playing tricks on the eyes. Every snap of a twig underfoot sounded like a gunshot. Every rustle in the undergrowth made men jump, hands flying to their weapons. "It feels like the trees have eyes," Miller, the young ranger, whispered to Jeb, his voice barely audible. Jeb, usually stoic, just grunted, his own gaze darting nervously into the gloomy depths between the trees. "Keep your eyes peeled, boy, and your mouth shut." The tension was a constant companion, coiling in their stomachs. One afternoon, a ranger, startled by a sudden movement in the bushes, spun and fired his rifle. The shot echoed through the forest, followed by an angry shout in Comanche. Iron Hawk and Eli rushed to the spot to find the ranger aiming at a furious Silent Fox, who had an arrow nocked and aimed right back. "He jumped out at me!" the ranger exclaimed, his face pale. "I was tracking." Silent Fox spat, his English heavily accented but clear enough. "You can nearly put a bullet in me, white man." It took all of Eli's and Iron Hawk's authority to de-escalate the situation. "Hold your fire," Eli snapped. "Everyone, damn it! We're on the same side here, remember?" He shot a glare at the ranger. "You see before you shoot?" Incidents like these frayed nerves further. The Comanches muttered amongst themselves, their distrust of the trigger-happy Rangers deepening. The Rangers, in turn, felt unnerved by the Comanches' stealth, often mistaking their silent approach for a potential ambush. But the tracks of the beast drew them onward, a terrifying breadcrumb trail. They were undeniably fresh in places, the edges still sharp in the damp earth. The sheer size of the prints was enough to make even the toughest man's blood run cold. They found a deer carcass, not 24 hours old, ripped apart with the same savage fury they'd seen at Oakhaven Creek. Its eyes were wide with a terror that lingered even in death. The monster was close. They could almost feel its breath on the back of their necks. One evening, as they made a cold camp, no fires allowed, lest they attract their quarry, a low, mournful howl echoed through the trees. It wasn't the howl of a normal wolf. This was deeper, more powerful, and carried a chilling note of something utterly inhuman. The sound seemed to vibrate in their bones. Horses whinnied nervously, stamping their feet. Men, both Ranger and Comanche, clutched their weapons tighter, their eyes wide in the gathering gloom. "It knows we are here," Running Wolf said softly to Iron Hawk, his voice barely a breath. Iron Hawk nodded, his gaze fixed on the dark wall of trees from where the howl had come. "It is not afraid." Eli felt a prickle of cold sweat on his brow, despite the humid night air. He looked at his men, at the Comanches. Fear was a great leveler. In the face of that sound, their differences seemed to fade slightly, replaced by a shared primal dread. They were all just men, small and vulnerable, hunting something that felt like a primordial god of hunger and death. The footprints of fear were leading them deeper into its domain, and the price of following was becoming terrifyingly clear. Every shadow now held the promise of fangs and claws, and the silence between the howls was almost worse, filled with the terrifying anticipation of what lurked just beyond their sight. The decision to set a trap was born of desperation. Days of tracking had yielded little more than frayed nerves and the constant oppressive sense of being watched. The beast was too cunning, always seeming to be one step ahead, its trail vanishing in rocky terrain or dense thickets, only to reappear miles away, often after another reported attack filtered back to them from a frantic messenger. They needed to force a confrontation, to draw the creature to them. They chose a narrow ravine, a natural choke point with steep, rocky walls. A fresh deer carcass, procured by Comanche hunters, was placed as bait in the center. Rangers, armed with their heavy repeating rifles, concealed themselves on one side of the ravine, while Comanche archers, their arrows tipped with newly fashioned silver slivers, scavenged from a few traded coins and ornaments. A desperate nod to old legends whispered by Iron Hawk's elders hid amongst the rocks on the other. Eli and Iron Hawk took up positions near each other, a vantage point that offered a clear view of the bait, though it left them somewhat exposed. The wait was agonizing. Hours crawled by under the oppressive Texas sun, then into the eerie twilight. The only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the thumping of their own hearts. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent jolts of adrenaline through the hidden men. Doubt began to creep in. Had the beast somehow sensed their plan? Then, as full darkness enveloped the ravine, a new sound emerged. A soft padding, almost inaudible, like heavy paws on soft earth. A low growl rumbled so deep it felt more than heard. From the mouth of the ravine, a massive shape detached itself from the shadows. It was huge, far larger than any wolf Eli had ever imagined. Its shoulders broad and powerful, its head low. In the faint moonlight filtering through a break in the clouds, its fur looked coarse and dark, matted with what might have been dried blood. Its eyes glowed with a faint internal luminescence, reflecting the dim light with a chilling, predatory intensity. The werewolf, for Eli could no longer deny what it was, moved with a terrifying grace, its massive form surprisingly fluid. It sniffed the air, its head turning slowly, then padded towards the deer carcass. "Wait for my signal," Eli breathed, his voice barely a whisper into the speaking tube that connected him to his rifleman. Beside him, Iron Hawk nocked an arrow, his movements economical and precise. The beast reached the deer. It lowered its great head, and the sound of tearing flesh and crunching bone echoed unnervingly in the stillness. This was their chance. "Now!" Eli yelled, and the ravine exploded with noise. Rifle fire erupted from one side, muzzle flashes briefly illuminating the terrifying scene. Comanche arrows hissed through the air from the other. The werewolf, startled, let out a deafening roar of pain and fury, a sound that ripped through the night and chilled them to the marrow. It reared up, and for a horrifying instant it seemed to stand almost like a man, its silhouette monstrous against the pale sky. But it was far from down. It spun, incredibly fast for its size, and charged not towards the bait, but directly at the source of the rifle fire. Rangers scrambled, firing wildly. One man screamed as the beast, a black blur of motion, slammed into their position. The sound of his rifle clattering on the rocks was followed by a wet, tearing sound. "Fire at will! Keep firing!" Eli bellowed, aiming his own rifle and squeezing the trigger. He saw his bullet strike the creature's flank, making it snarl and stumble, but it didn't go down. Ironhawk loosed arrow after arrow, his silver-tipped shafts finding their mark. The werewolf flinched when they hit, letting out pained yelps that were distinctly different from its reaction to the bullets. The silver? Eli thought with a jolt. The old stories might be true. The fight devolved into chaos. The beast was a whirlwind of claws and fangs, incredibly strong and ferociously resilient. It savaged another ranger, then turned, its glowing eyes fixing on the Comanche side. With a tremendous leap, it crossed the narrow ravine, landing amongst the archers. A Comanche warrior went down with a choked cry. Eli and Ironhawk found themselves suddenly in the thick of it, firing and shooting at near point-blank range. Eli saw Ironhawk take a glancing blow from a massive paw that sent him sprawling, his bow flying from his grasp. Without thinking, Eli stepped in front of the downed Comanche leader, firing his Colt revolver into the werewolf's snarling face. The beast recoiled, shaking its head, giving Ironhawk precious seconds to scramble back, snatching up a fallen spear. Slowly, agonizingly, their combined assault began to tell. The silver arrows, though fewer in number, seemed to cause the creature more significant distress. The relentless rifle fire, while not stopping it, was clearly wounding it. Bleeding from dozens of wounds, the werewolf let out another ear-splitting howl, this one tinged with something akin to frustration. Then, as suddenly as it had attacked, it disengaged, turned, and fled back into the darkness from which it had come, a wounded, raging shadow. Silence, heavy and ringing, descended upon the ravine. The only sounds were the ragged breathing of the survivors, the groans of the wounded, and the distant fading howls of the retreating beast. They had drawn first blood, but the cost was high. 2 rangers were dead, another badly mauled. 1 Comanche warrior was lost, another 2 injured. The ravine was a scene of carnage, the scent of gunpowder mixing with the coppery tang of fresh blood, both human and inhuman. Eli helped a shaken Ironhawk to his feet. The Comanche leader had a long, bloody gash on his arm, where the werewolf's claws had raked him. "The silver!" Ironhawk rasped, looking at the arrow still clutched in his hand. "It fears the silver." Eli nodded, his own hands trembling slightly. "And our guns still pack a punch." He looked around at the devastation, at the pale, shocked faces of his men and Ironhawk's warriors. The trap had been sprung, but the beast was still alive, wounded and undoubtedly enraged. They had hurt it, yes. They had learned a crucial weakness. But in doing so, they had also signed their own death warrants if they couldn't finish the job. The terror of the night attack was still fresh, but beneath it, a new, grim resolve was beginning to form. They had fought side by side, Ranger and Comanche, against a common nightmare. And for a few terrifying minutes, their old hatreds had been utterly forgotten in the desperate struggle to survive. The aftermath of the battle in the ravine left a somber mood hanging over the combined group. They had proven the beast could be wounded, that it was not invincible. The silver arrows had, indeed, seemed to cause it more pain than lead bullets alone. But the creature's ferocity, its raw power, and its cunning were now terrifyingly apparent. It had not just blundered into their trap. It had turned the tables, inflicting serious casualties before making its escape. "It learns," Iron Hawk stated grimly, as they tended to their wounded under the pale light of dawn. His gashed arm had been bound tightly by one of his warriors, his face stoic despite the pain. It knew the rifles were the greater danger. It attacked them first. Eli nodded, his own face etched with weariness and a new, deeper anxiety. And it didn't stick around once it realized it was taking too much damage. It's not just a dumb animal. This was the most unsettling realization. They were not hunting a mere beast of instinct, but something with a malevolent intelligence, capable of strategy. The next few days confirmed their fears. The werewolf seemed to vanish. The massive tracks they had followed so diligently disappeared on stretches of hard, rocky ground, or in swift-flowing streams, as if the creature was deliberately covering its trail. Patrols found nothing. The forest fell quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now. The silence of a predator that was itself hunting, observing, waiting. The psychological toll was immense. The men grew jumpier than ever. Every shadow seemed to conceal the beast. Every distant sound was its approaching footfall. Sleep offered little respite, often disturbed by nightmares of glowing eyes and tearing claws. Food tasted like ash. The camaraderie born of shared terror in the ravine began to fray under the strain of constant vigilance and gnawing uncertainty. Then the beast began its own campaign of terror, more subtle, but no less effective than a direct assault. One morning, a ranger sentry posted on the perimeter of their camp was found missing. There was no sign of a struggle, no blood, just his rifle lying on the ground and a single enormous paw print pressed deep into the earth beside it, as if left as a deliberate message. They searched for hours, but found no trace of the man. He had simply vanished into the oppressive silence of the woods. A few days later, 2 Comanche hunters, skilled and wary, went out to scout for game. Only one returned, stumbling into camp, his face a mask of terror, babbling about a shadow that moved faster than a striking snake, of his companion being snatched away into the trees before he could even nock an arrow. The werewolf was no longer just reacting. It was actively hunting them, picking them off one by one, exploiting any weakness, any lapse in their guard. It avoided direct confrontation, preferring stealth and ambush. It seemed to be toying with them, letting them know it was always there, always watching. "It tries to break us," Eli said to Iron Hawk one evening, as they sat by a low, carefully shielded fire. The air was thick with unspoken fear, to make us turn on each other or scatter. Iron Hawk stared into the flames, his dark eyes troubled. "It knows we are weaker when we are afraid. It feeds on our fear." He picked up a handful of pebbles, letting them trickle through his fingers. "My grandfather said such creatures can smell fear, can taste it on the wind. They are drawn to it." The old doubts and prejudices began to resurface. Some of the rangers muttered that the Comanches weren't pulling their weight, that their spirit magic was useless against such a foe. Some Comanches, in turn, whispered that the white men's loud ways and reliance on noisy guns were what kept angering the beast, drawing its wrath upon them all. Eli and Ironhawk found themselves constantly battling this internal erosion of their fragile alliance, even as they tried to anticipate the werewolf's next move. The forest itself seemed to become an enemy. Familiar landmarks looked menacing. The wind sighing through the pines sounded like the creature's breath. They were deep in its territory now, and it was using every advantage the wilderness offered. It left grisly tokens, a shredded piece of a missing man's shirt here, a gnawed bone there, placed where they would be sure to find them, little reminders of its power and their vulnerability. One night, the beast didn't attack physically, but its howls surrounded their camp, closer than ever before, echoing from all directions. It was a symphony of terror, designed to unnerve them, to rob them of sleep, to wear down their resolve. Men huddled closer together, rifles and bows clutched tightly, their eyes darting into the impenetrable darkness beyond the firelight. Eli saw the strain on their faces, the hollow-eyed exhaustion. He felt it himself, a constant thrumming tension under his skin. The werewolf was smart. It was adapting. It had felt their strength in the ravine, and now it was avoiding a direct fight, choosing instead to bleed them slowly, to break their spirit before it broke their bodies. The hunt had become a deadly game of cat and mouse, but it was becoming increasingly unclear who was the cat and who was the mouse. The pressure was mounting, and Eli knew that if they didn't find a way to force another confrontation and win it decisively, their alliance and their lives would soon be forfeit. The beast was not just closing in physically, it was invading their minds. The strain was becoming unbearable. Men were starting to snap, arguments flaring over trivialities. The constant fear, the lack of sleep, and the feeling of being relentlessly stalked by an intelligent, malevolent force were wearing them down to raw nerves. Eli and Ironhawk knew they couldn't sustain this for much longer. They had to force the beast's hand, even if it meant walking into another potential slaughter. Their scouts, Silent Fox and a grizzled ranger named Peterson, finally found what they believed might be the creature's regular hunting path. A game trail that led from the dense forest towards a small, secluded spring, one of the few reliable water sources in the area during the dry spell. The tracks were fresher here, more concentrated. It was a gamble, but it was the best they had. The plan was desperate, relying on a pincer movement. Half the group, under Ironhawk, would conceal themselves along one side of the game trail, hidden in the thick underbrush and rocky outcrops. The other half, led by Eli, would take up positions on the opposite side. The idea was to let the beast pass between them, then hit it from both sides with a volley of rifle fire and silver-tipped arrows, hoping to cripple it before it could mount a coordinated attack. They lay in wait as dusk bled into a moonless, suffocating night. The air was still and heavy, amplifying every tiny sound. Hours passed. The silence stretched, becoming a torment in itself. Was it coming? Had it sensed them again? Eli could feel the doubt gnawing at him, the cold fear coiling in his gut. He glanced across the barely visible trail, towards where Ironhawk and his men were hidden. He could see nothing, a testament to their skill in concealment. Then, a faint sound, the crunch of a dry leaf, a soft footfall. Eli's heart leaped into his throat. He signaled to his men with a barely perceptible hand movement. Ready. The massive dark shape materialized on the trail, moving with its familiar, unnerving silence. It was heading directly towards the spring, just as they'd hoped. It passed the first group of hidden Comanches. Eli held his breath, waiting for it to reach the center of their kill zone. A few more steps. Suddenly, the werewolf stopped. Its great head lifted, sniffing the air. It let out a low, guttural growl. It knew, before Eli could give the signal to fire, all hell broke loose. But not in the way they'd planned. With a speed that defied its bulk, the werewolf didn't charge forward or retreat. It veered sharply sideways, directly into the dense thicket where Ironhawk and his men were concealed. There were surprised shouts, the twang of bowstrings, and then horrifying screams. "Open fire!" Eli roared, realizing their carefully laid trap had just been turned on its head. The beast had anticipated them, or perhaps simply sensed the closer threat and attacked it first. Rangers on Eli's side unleashed a volley, but their targets were obscured by the trees and the chaos. Bullets ripped through leaves and thudded into tree trunks. They could hear the sounds of a desperate close-quarters struggle. Men yelling, the beast's savage snarls, the sickening thud of heavy blows. "Advance! Support them!" Eli yelled, scrambling out of his cover, his men following, firing as they moved. But crossing the game trail and plunging into the dense undergrowth where Ironhawk's men were fighting was treacherous in the dark. They arrived to a scene of pure nightmare. The werewolf was a maelstrom of fur and claws in the heart of the Comanche position. 2 warriors were already down, their bodies still. Ironhawk was engaged in a desperate struggle, his spear a blur, trying to fend off the snapping jaws. Silent Fox lay nearby, an arrow protruding from his own leg, apparently a misfire in the confusion, his face contorted in pain. Rangers opened fire, trying to get a clear shot without hitting the Comanches. The beast, enraged, spun and charged one of Eli's men, a young ranger named Henderson, bowling him over before Eli could intervene. Henderson screamed, a sound cut short with sickening finality. It was a disaster. The pincer had collapsed. Their ambush had become a frantic melee in the pitch-black woods, with the werewolf at its terrifying best, using the darkness and confusion to its advantage. It moved with blinding speed, striking and then melting back into the shadows, only to reappear from another direction. Eli saw Ironhawk stagger, clutching his side, a dark stain spreading on his buckskins. The war chief was still on his feet, but he was clearly badly wounded. The remaining Comanches fought with the courage of desperation, but they were outmatched. "Fall back! Fall back to the creek!" Eli shouted, realizing the fight was lost. They couldn't win like this. They were being slaughtered. He grabbed a wounded ranger, hauling him up, while firing his revolver over his shoulder at the monstrous shape that lunged from the darkness. The retreat was a chaotic, terrifying scramble. They dragged their wounded, firing blindly behind them, the savage roars of the werewolf echoing in their ears. They reached the small creek, splashing through the shallow water, hoping it might momentarily deter their pursuer. They regrouped on the far bank, a battered, bloodied, and drastically reduced force. Eli took a quick, horrifying head count. At least 3 rangers gone or dead. He didn't know how many Comanches. He saw Ironhawk being helped by two of his remaining warriors, his face pale and drawn in the faint starlight. The werewolf did not pursue them across the creek immediately. Instead, a long, triumphant howl ripped through the night, a sound that seemed to mock their defeat, to revel in their pain. Silence descended, broken only by the groans of the wounded and the ragged, desperate gasps of the survivors. All was lost. The beast had outsmarted them, outfought them. Their best-laid plan had resulted in a massacre. The alliance, already strained, felt like it was shattered beyond repair. Eli looked at the faces of his remaining men. Fear, despair, and a dawning, hopeless anger reflected in their eyes. He felt it himself, a crushing weight of failure. The beast was too strong, too cunning. Perhaps it truly was a demon, an unstoppable force of nature. The darkest night had fallen, and with it, it seemed, all hope had been extinguished. The remnants of the hunting party huddled by the creek. A miserable, defeated band. The triumphant howls of the werewolf had faded, leaving an even more terrifying silence in their wake. The night was cold, and the dampness from the creek seeped into their bones, chilling them further than the air alone could. Eli moved among his rangers, his heart a leaden weight in his chest. Young Henderson was gone. Peterson, the grizzled veteran, had a broken arm and a deep gash on his leg. Miller, miraculously, was unharmed but visibly shaken, his youthful bravado completely stripped away. Across the narrow creek, the Comanches were in even worse shape. Eli could see Ironhawk leaning heavily against a tree, one of his warriors trying to staunch the bleeding from the deep wound in his side. Silent Fox was being tended to, the arrow grimly pulled from his thigh. Several other warriors were missing, their fates unknown but grimly suspected. The carefully constructed alliance, forged in desperation, felt like it had crumbled into dust and blood. "It's no use, Captain," Miller whispered, his voice hoarse. "We can't beat it. It's not natural." Eli didn't answer immediately. He looked at Ironhawk, who met his gaze across the water. The Comanche leader's face was a mask of pain and fury, but also a profound, weary despair that mirrored Eli's own. For a long moment, neither spoke. The chasm of their old enmity, briefly bridged by a common enemy, seemed to have reopened wider than ever. Then, one of the elder Comanche warriors, a man named Grey Cloud, whose face was a roadmap of wrinkles and old scars, began to speak in a low, chanting voice. He wasn't speaking to the Rangers, but to his own people, his words rising and falling in the darkness. Eli couldn't understand the language, but the tone was one of ancient sorrow, of stories passed down through countless generations. Ironhawk listened intently, his head bowed. After a while, Grey Cloud fell silent. Ironhawk pushed himself away from the tree, wincing, and took a few unsteady steps towards the creek bank. "My grandfather," Ironhawk began, his voice strained but carrying across the water, "told of a beast like this, not just a wolf, but a spirit of vengeance, a shadow that feeds on strife. He said it cannot be killed by ordinary means alone." Eli waited. He had heard similar tales from old-timers back in the settlements, tales he'd always dismissed as superstition. But after what they'd faced, the silver, "It hurts the beast," Ironhawk continued, touching the wound on his arm where he'd been raked in the first ambush. "But its hide is thick, its spirit strong. Grey Cloud remembers the old words. The spirit beast, the Pakanumu, fears not just silver, but fire. Great fire. And it is tied to the moon. Its power waxes and wanes with it. He looked up at the sky, where the moon was now nearly full. A malevolent silver disk. It is strongest now. But its lair. It must have a place where it sleeps, where it hides from the sun. A place where it is, perhaps, less guarded. Eli listened, a tiny spark igniting in the cold darkness of his despair. Fire! They hadn't truly tried to use fire against it, not in a significant way. And a lair. If they could find its den, perhaps they could corner it, use fire and silver in a concentrated assault. "We saw where it fled tonight," Eli said slowly, an idea forming. It moved back towards the broken bluffs. It's rough country, full of caves and overhangs. If it has a den, it might be there. He looked at his own men. They were beaten, demoralized. He looked at the Comanches, equally battered. "It's a long shot," Eli admitted. "Maybe the longest. It'll expect us to run, to scatter. It won't expect us to come after it again, not now. Not to its home." Silence. The only sound was the gentle murmur of the creek and the ragged breathing of the wounded. Then Miller, surprisingly, spoke up. "Captain, if there's a chance, any chance, Henderson, we can't just let it win." His voice was trembling, but there was a new steel in it. One by one, a few other Rangers nodded, their expressions grim but resolute. The thought of their fallen comrades, of the sheer audacity of the beast, was fanning the embers of their fighting spirit. Iron Hawk spoke to his remaining warriors in their own tongue. There was a brief, hushed discussion. Then he turned back to Eli. "We have lost many. Our hearts are heavy, but the Pakanumu has tasted our blood. It will not stop until it has taken us all, or we have taken it. If there is a place it calls home, we will take the fight there." He straightened despite his wound, a flicker of his old fire returning to his eyes. "We will need much fire, and all the silver we possess." A fragile, desperate hope began to dawn. It was born not of confidence, but of sheer stubborn refusal to be extinguished. They were grievously wounded, their numbers depleted, but they had a sliver of new knowledge, a potential weakness to exploit, and a shared desire for vengeance that transcended their fear. "All right," Eli said, his voice gaining strength. "We rest for a few hours, tend the wounded as best we can. At first light, those who can still fight, we go to the broken bluffs. We'll need torches, plenty of them, and every piece of silver we can find, no matter how small." He looked at Iron Hawk. "Your trackers will have to lead us, find its den." Iron Hawk nodded. "They will find it." It was a sliver, just a glimmer, but in the profound darkness of that terrible night, it was enough. They had been to the brink of annihilation, stared into the abyss. Now, with nothing left to lose, they would gather their broken pieces and make one final, desperate stand. The beast thought it had broken them. It was about to find out that cornered men, united by loss and a burning desire for retribution, could be the most dangerous foe of all. The hunt was not over. It was about to enter its most deadly phase. The first pale light of dawn found a grimly determined, if significantly smaller group, preparing for what everyone knew was their final, desperate gamble. They were a walking wounded army. Iron Hawk, his side tightly bound, moved with a painful stiffness, but refused to be left behind. Eli's arm throbbed from a deep scratch he'd barely noticed in the chaos of the night. Silent Fox, despite the arrow wound in his leg, insisted on guiding them, his knowledge of the broken bluffs unparalleled. They had scavenged every last bit of silver, buttons cut from uniforms, a few dented coins, small ornaments from Comanche medicine bags, even the inlay from a fancy pistol grip. These were painstakingly hammered into arrowheads or bound to spear tips. Rangers sacrificed oil from their lamps and dry rations to create makeshift torches, their cloth wrappings soaked in flammable liquids. The preparations were hasty, fueled by a cold, quiet fury. They went into the forest and killed the beast, with guns and with bows and arrows. The old, simple words of the original premise echoed in Eli's mind, now imbued with the terrifying weight of their reality. It sounded so straightforward, yet every step towards the broken bluffs was a step into deeper uncertainty, deeper danger. Silent Fox, leaning heavily on a sturdy branch fashioned into a crutch, led the way. The bluffs were a jagged scar on the landscape, a maze of rocky outcrops, shadowed crevices, and hidden caves. The air here felt older, colder. The silence was profound, broken only by the scuff of their boots on loose rock and the occasional dislodged pebble skittering down a slope. After nearly 2 hours of careful searching, Silent Fox stopped at the mouth of a dark fissure, almost hidden behind a curtain of tangled vines and overgrown bushes. The opening was low and narrow, but the air wafting from it was thick with a fetid, animalistic stench. The same rank odour they'd encountered at Oakhaven Creek and near every site of the werewolf's carnage. And pressed into the damp earth just inside the entrance was a fresh, undeniable print of a massive, clawed paw. "This is it," Silent Fox whispered, his voice hoarse. "The belly of the beast." A ripple of apprehension went through the group. Eli exchanged a look with Ironhawk. No turning back now. "Torches ready," Eli ordered, his voice low. "Rifles up. Comanches, prepare your arrows. We go in slow and quiet. If it's in there, it's likely sleeping after its night's work." The narrow passage opened into a larger cavern, surprisingly vast. The only light came from their sputtering torches, casting long, dancing shadows that made the rock formations look like grotesque, watching figures. The stench was overpowering here, a nauseating mix of dried blood, damp fur and decay. Piles of bones, animal and chillingly human, were scattered in the darker corners. This was undeniably the werewolf's lair, and there, in the deepest recess of the cavern, curled upon a bed of dried leaves and tattered hides, lay the beast. It was even larger than they remembered, its massive form rising and falling with slow, deep breaths. In the flickering torchlight, its dark fur seemed to absorb the light, making it look like a creature hewn from shadow itself. Even in sleep, it radiated an aura of primal menace. For a moment, everyone froze, a collective intake of breath. This was their chance. Eli gave the signal. He wouldn't shout this time. A subtle nod. The first volley of silver-tipped arrows hissed through the cavern, striking the sleeping beast. It let out a choked, gurgling roar, a sound of pure agony, and jolted awake, instantly alert. Before it could fully rise, the Rangers opened fire, their rifles cracking in the enclosed space, the sound deafening. Bullets tore into its thick hide, making it stagger. But it was far from finished. With a scream of incandescent rage, the werewolf launched itself at them. The cavern became a chaotic inferno of light, sound, and violence. Torches were brandished, their flames licking at the beast as it charged. It swatted one torch away, sending it clattering against a wall, nearly plunging them into darkness. Rangers fired point blank, the muzzle flashes momentarily blinding. Comanches, nimble and quick, darted in and out, loosing arrows at close range, aiming for its eyes, its throat, any vulnerability. Eli found himself face to face with the monster, its glowing eyes burning into his, its hot, fetid breath washing over him. He emptied his revolver into its chest, each shot making it flinch, but still it came on. He saw its massive, clawed paw descending, and he threw himself sideways, feeling the wind of its passage, the claws tearing through his sleeve and drawing blood. Iron Hawk, despite his injury, fought like a demon. He plunged a silver-tipped spear deep into the werewolf's shoulder, earning a savage snap of its jaws that barely missed his face. He wrenched the spear free with a grunt, blood, both his and the beast's, staining his arms. The battle was a desperate, swirling melee. Men shouted, the beast roared, the cavern filled with the acrid smoke of gunpowder and burning pitch. The silver arrows and spearheads were clearly having an effect, causing the creature more visible pain than the bullets, making it hesitate, its movements becoming slightly less coordinated. The fire, too, seemed to disorient it. It shied away from the waving torches, blinking against their glare. Young Miller, his face a mask of terrified determination, thrust a burning torch into the werewolf's face as it lunged. The beast shrieked, a high-pitched sound of pure agony, recoiling, its fur singeing. This gave Eli an opening. He scrambled for his rifle, levered a fresh round, and took careful aim at the creature's exposed neck as it pawed at its burning face. He fired. The bullet struck true. The werewolf staggered, a new dark gout of blood appearing. It stumbled, its mighty roars turning into gurgling whimpers. It tried to rise, to make one last, desperate lunge, but its legs buckled. More arrows thudded into its body. More bullets found their mark. With a final shuddering cough, the massive beast collapsed onto the cavern floor. Its glowing eyes flickered, dimmed, and then went dark. An unearthly silence descended, broken only by the harsh, ragged breathing of the survivors, the drip of water from the cavern roof, and the crackle of a dropped torch slowly consuming itself. For a long moment, no one moved. They stared at the still form of the monster, a mountain of dark fur and lifeless muscle. Was it truly dead? Was the nightmare finally over? Eli cautiously approached, his rifle still aimed. He nudged the creature's massive head with his boot. No reaction. He looked at Iron Hawk, who was leaning heavily on his spear, his face grim but with a flicker of exhausted triumph in his eyes. It is done, Iron Hawk rasped, his voice barely audible. Slowly, the reality began to sink in. They had done it. Against all odds, they had faced the embodiment of their deepest fears, hunted it to its very lair, and destroyed it. The cost had been terrible, but they had prevailed. The guns and the bows and arrows, the fire and the silver, the courage of Rangers and Comanches fighting as one, it had been enough. The beast lay dead in the heart of its domain. The air in the cavern slowly cleared of smoke, but the stench of death, the beast's and the lingering scent of its many victims remained heavy and oppressive. Eli felt a wave of exhaustion so profound it was all he could do to remain standing. He looked around at the survivors. Their faces were smudged with soot and blood, their clothes torn, their eyes wide with a mixture of shock, grief, and a dawning, incredulous relief. They had won. The monster that had terrorized the frontier, that had forced bitter enemies into a desperate alliance, was no more. Miller was leaning against a cavern wall, his shoulders shaking, whether from reaction or quiet sobs, Eli couldn't tell. Jeb, ever the stoic, was methodically reloading his rifle, though his hands trembled slightly. The remaining Comanches gathered around Ironhawk, who had sunk to his knees, not in defeat, but in sheer, bone-weary depletion. Silent Fox, despite his leg, managed a grim smile. No one spoke for a long time. The shared experience of the brutal, terrifying battle hung in the air, a silent testament to what they had endured. The lines between Ranger and Comanche, so starkly drawn before, seemed blurred, almost invisible in the dim, torchlit cavern. They were simply survivors, men who had faced death together, and somehow, miraculously, emerged on the other side. Eli walked over to Ironhawk. The Comanche leader looked up, his dark eyes meeting Eli's. There was no animosity there, no lingering suspicion, only a shared understanding that transcended words. "It is finished," Eli said, his voice hoarse. Ironhawk nodded slowly. "The land will breathe again." He gestured to the massive, still form of the werewolf. "Its shadow will no longer fall upon our people." Slowly, carefully, they made their way out of the cavern, back into the pale, clean light of day. The fresh air felt like a blessing, washing away the cloying stench of the lair. The sun, just beginning to climb higher in the sky, seemed brighter, the colors of the landscape more vibrant. The oppressive fear that had gripped the land for weeks was beginning to lift, like a morning mist burning away. They made a grim camp a short distance from the broken bluffs, needing to rest, to tend their wounds properly, to absorb the finality of what had happened. The bodies of their fallen comrades, both Ranger and Comanche, were recovered from the sites of the previous battles, a somber task that brought fresh waves of grief. They would be buried with honor, their sacrifices not in vain. As the day wore on, a quiet sense of camaraderie, born of shared trauma and mutual respect, settled over the small group. They shared water from the same canteens, food from the same dwindling supplies. Rangers helped Comanche warriors tend their wounds, and Comanches offered what herbs they had to ease the pain of the white men. The old barriers, while not entirely gone, felt significantly lowered. They had seen each other at their most vulnerable, fought for each other's lives. That kind of experience forged bonds that even deep-seated enmity couldn't entirely erase. By late afternoon, it was time to part ways. The truce, by its explicit terms, was over. The beast was dead. Eli approached Ironhawk. The Comanche leader stood straighter now, his wounds bound, his gaze clear. "The truce is ended," Eli said, the words feeling strangely formal after the intimacy of their shared battle. "You and your people are free to go your way." Ironhawk met his gaze. "And you, Stone, yours." He paused, then added, "You fought well. Your men fought well. For what was done, my people will remember." "As will mine," Eli replied. "You and your warriors saved us more than once, Ironhawk. That won't be forgotten either." There was a moment of silence, a recognition of the profound shift that had occurred. The war between them might resume, The land, the resources, the old grievances were still there. But something had irrevocably changed. They had seen the humanity in each other, the courage, the willingness to sacrifice. The enemy lines, once so clearly defined, were now blurred by the shared blood spilled in the fight against a common, unnatural foe. Ironhawk gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. He turned and spoke briefly to his warriors. Then, without a backward glance, they melted into the trees, heading back towards their own territory. Eli watched them go, a strange mix of emotions churning within him. Relief, sadness, and a weary understanding. He turned to his own men. "Let's head back to Fort Worth," he said. "We've got a lot of explaining to do." As they rode away from the broken bluffs, the sun beginning to set, painting the sky in hues of purple and orange, Eli knew this chapter of his life was over. The scary beast was gone. The alliance, born of necessity, had served its purpose and dissolved. The future of the Texas frontier, the relationship between Ranger and Comanche, remained uncertain, but for a brief, bloody period, they had stood together, enemies united against a terror that threatened to consume them all. And in that unity, they had found not just survival, but a glimpse of something more. The quiet respect in Ironhawk's eyes as they parted was a memory Eli Stone would carry with him for a long, long time, a silent testament to the uneasy dawn that followed their darkest night. The monster was dead, but the echoes of its terror and the surprising strength found in their unholy alliance would linger.